Not sure if other generations had the same issue, but I keep seeing posts about people barely able to afford monthly payments on homes with a 6 to 8% interest rate. In my mind, it's crazy that something as seemingly arbitrary as a 5-year difference entirely predicts whether you will live comfortably or barely scrape by. Seems like there's a serious class divide for millennials based on this. I have been thinking about this Reddit post for months, and it's time to talk about it. What's up, y'all? I'm Kara Perez, founder of Bravely Go, and I like to think of myself as a classic millennial. I'm 36. I have a very clear memory of 9/11. I'm the only one of my siblings to go to college, which I had to take out student loans to afford. I graduated in 2011 into a job landscape absolutely devastated by the Great Recession and really kind of the rise of the gig economy. And I have never had a full-time salaried position. I paid off all my student loan debt by working 5 different part-time jobs and living on $10,000 a year in Austin, Texas. And the only reason I was able to save my first emergency fund is because I kept living like that after I was debt-free. Now, I know that my experience is not representative of the entire generation, but if you're a millennial, definitely let me know in the comments if anything about that story resonates with you. I also know, anecdotally, a lot of millennials with a lot of money. I know millennials whose parents paid out of pocket for their college experience. I know millennials with trust funds. I know millennials whose parents were able to help them with their first down payment or whose parents were able to help them jumpstart their own business. So I feel like in my experience, I have lived this millennial class divide that this Reddit post refers to. But is the class divide millennial specific? Are millennials the most financially cursed generation? And are millennials the most financially disparate generation? And I'd like to encourage you to become a patron. Our patrons allow us to do this kind of work. They allow me to do the research needed to make these videos, and they allow me to put out content here on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok. We are a small, all-women, completely independent media organization. We rarely take sponsorships. If you look back through this channel, you'll see maybe 3 videos that have sponsors, and that's because of our patrons. Before we go any further, what is a millennial? As I'm making this video in 2024, millennials are between the ages of 28 and 43, and many of us feel like we are living out a generational curse. It feels like, as a millennial, every 10 years, some once-in-a-lifetime experience comes along and absolutely wrecks our chance at adulting in the traditional way. You know, in 2001, 9/11 happens. In 2008, the Great Recession happens. In 2020, COVID happens. It's just like, as soon as we pick ourselves up, bam, here comes another thing. I mean, honestly, I don't want to sound superstitious or anything, but I'm like, 2029, whoo! Who knows what that year holds? In the US, the traditional path to wealth has been get married, buy a home, work at one job for the majority of your career, retire with a pension. But what's really interesting is that when millennials talk about, oh, generations that came before us had it easier, we're really only referring to the boomers. Because if you go back another generation, the silent generation, or the generation before that who was born and lived in the 1800s, there was not a traditional path to wealth because American society looked very different. America didn't become the global superpower that it is today really until the 1950s. Before that, most people in the United States were born in their family homes, remained in that family home or very nearby, worked the family farm or worked in the family business, and then passed away. For normal people, and I mean people outside of the very elite classes of the 1800s and the early 1900s, there wasn't really, oh, you should travel, you should go to college, you should do all of these things that we now consider normal adult experiences. It really was just be born, work, have some kids, die. That sounds like kind of bleak, but that was really the general path. The more modern path to American success and the American dream of, you know, a white picket fence and a home of your own and 2.5 kids, that really came about in a post-World War II economy. That's when this idea of you should be able to get a job with or without a college degree that allows you to buy a house, afford a family, work at that job for 40 years, and then retire with a pension came about. And the generation that largely experienced that was the boomers. And now in the United States, that's just largely not financially possible. Most families need 2 working parents to be able to afford a home and daycare and savings and their own retirement and saving for things like their children's college. Now, it's hard to find reliable data on inherited wealth and family money in the United States, and that's largely because a lot of people with money don't want you to know how much money they have. So when you ask questions like, how much did your parents help you? Or is your family rich? They'll say crazy things like, my family's comfortable, or we're not the Kardashians. And it's like, yeah, bro, the Kardashians represent 0.00001% of the human experience. Nobody has Kardashian money when you look at it from a global perspective. The average global personal income is $9,733 per year. But certain families in the US, but certain families everywhere in the world have always had money, right? I mean, here in the US, we know many of the names of wealthy families from the 1800s. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Astors, the Vanderbilts. They named buildings and libraries and universities after themselves. And even if you didn't come from one of the most fabulously wealthy families of all time, many families in the United States do have some form of generational wealth. Like I said before, the boomers experienced a once-in-a-lifetime expansion of the American economy, and many boomers were able to do things like buy houses for $30,000 in 1960, 1970, and hold on to those houses that are now worth $500,000, $800,000, $1.2 million. So many, not all, but many boomers who are the parents of millennials, are now quite wealthy, and when they pass away, millennials stand to inherit quite a bit of cash, about $90 trillion. But crucially, this money isn't going to be passed to all millennials equally. Not every millennial is going to receive a check every single time a boomer passes away. Just like some millennials had help from their parents on paying for college or their first down payment, some millennials will inherit money, and some millennials won't. According to the Federal Reserve, since wealth transfers are often between family members in similar income or wealth classes, the smoothing role is likely limited. Indeed, we find that the recipients of intergenerational transfers are much more likely to be college educated, high income, and high wealth. Translation: the millennials that already have money are likely to inherit more money, and the millennials that don't have money are not likely to inherit money. And that's one of the things feeding this millennial class divide. Now, on the topic of inheritances, I do think it's important to understand that since life costs so much more than it used to, especially since prices of everything have gone up in the last 5 years specifically, inheritances might not go as far as they once did. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a millennial who does not expect to inherit anything at all, and so any type of inheritance is probably a financial gift to many people. But if you're a millennial whose parents pass away when you're 40 and you still have $35,000 in student loans and you haven't been able to buy a house yet, a $20,000 inheritance doesn't change your financial life drastically. It helps, it's a good thing, but it doesn't skyrocket you from lower middle class to upper middle class. And something that I think is also often missing from the inheritance conversation is the fact that even within certain families, you can have family members in different class brackets. And I'll use myself as an example here. I am the only one of my siblings to go to college. As a result, I earn more than my siblings. I've also paid off all of my educational debt, and I don't have any high interest debt like credit card debt. And my partner is in the exact same situation. If I were to inherit $10,000, that would be money that I could save or invest because I don't need to use it to pay off debt or to pay my bills. Whereas for my siblings, they would be using it to pay off debt or to pay their bills. Which means for me, I would be able to turn my inheritance into more money and my siblings wouldn't, therefore creating a class divide in my own family. For millennials, it kind of seems like timing is everything. Let's talk about every millennial's favorite point of conversation, the housing market. Houses have been at their cheapest since the turn of the millennia at 2 points, which both are important for the millennial generation. The very lowest was Q1 2009, when the average house price in the US was $257,000. The second was Q4 2011, when the average housing price was $259,700. And in the years between, housing did not see a huge spike, meaning there was a period of 2 years where older millennials were graduating college, getting jobs, and had the chance to enter the housing market at record lows. Those housing prices are gone for younger millennials and younger generations in general. Younger millennials and in general younger generations just did not have that chance to enter a housing market that affordable. Now, of course, caveat. Millennials that graduated in 2009 graduated into a awful job market because the Great Recession technically ended in 2009, but anyone who was in the job market around that time knows that the impacts of the housing market crash and the stock market crash lasted for way, way longer. I would argue that the impacts of the Great Recession lasted until around 2013. So there were plenty of millennials who, yes, were graduating, but were not getting jobs and were not buying houses because they couldn't afford it. But there also were plenty of millennials who did. And today, the average house price is $501,700, and interest rates are at their highest since 2001. So I'm not attacking older millennials, I'm just pointing out that we are in drastically different housing markets, and younger millennials just have to pay more to buy a house. And this timing issue is not limited to just the housing market, and it has not resolved itself, because COVID created another huge class divide between millennials. As a money nerd and as someone interested in socioeconomics, I will be thinking about and studying the economic impact of COVID-19, I genuinely think, for the rest of my life. Because the things that the US government did in reaction to COVID, like the student loan pause, increasing the child tax credit, increasing unemployment payouts, had such a huge impact on the day-to-day financial lives of everyone in the United States, and especially for this video, millennials. Millennials that had student loan debt were able to take advantage of the pause in two major ways. A, they could continue to make payments without having to pay interest. So all of their payments went to the principal, allowing them to pay off their debt faster. Or they could not make those payments, take advantage of the pause, and put all of that money into savings and investments. And 2020 was a great year to be an investor. The S&P 500 returned 18.02% in 2020. And the next year, 2021, the S&P 500 returned 28.47%. Maybe you're not a money nerd like me, but let me tell you, those are huge returns. Those are returns you would be dancing about. You would be thrilled to have those returns. So anyone who was invested in the market, especially if they were able to put in more money than usual because they had all of these government programs they could take advantage of, saw huge, huge returns on their money. And any millennials that weren't invested missed potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At the same time, interest rates dropped to literally zero, which meant that if you had any type of debt, your interest rates were much lower. And if you had an asset like a house, you had also probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to refinance your mortgage interest rate. A lot of millennials who already owned their houses in 2020 and 2021 were able to refinance their interest rate down from 4 or 5% to 1.5%, 2.25%, 3%. And that doesn't necessarily sound like a lot, but when it comes to a monthly payment, going from a 5% to a 2.5% interest rate is a huge amount of savings. We are talking several $100s, if not several $1,000s. We are talking several $100s a month that you are saving on your interest rate. And of course, we all know what else was happening in the housing market between 2021 and 2023. Prices and equity were skyrocketing. So millennials who were already homeowners or who were able to buy in during that time saw the value of their house absolutely go through the roof, and they were able to get lower interest rates. So they were making money in two different ways. And millennials who weren't able to buy or weren't able to refinance are now dealing with a more expensive housing market with higher interest rates. You can just see that this financial progress was not happening pre-COVID. All of these changes come post-2019 due to, in large part, the changes made by the government. Honestly, what this all says to me is that if the government would get off its butt and do things like reinstate the child tax credit or create, federally subsidized childcare or cancel student loans altogether, more people would have more money. Like, we have so much proof, we have so much data at this point that when you don't strangle people with debt just for, trying to be adults, they boost the economy. They boost the stock market. And as your favorite money nerd, all of this data also says to me that investing is crucial for wealth building. And if you're not already investing, I strongly encourage you to get started today. Like right now, you can open an IRA and put in $5, $10, $20. You don't have to start investing with huge amounts of money. And I will put our free guide to investing in the description. I strongly encourage you to check that out. It's free, you don't have to pay for anything, and it will help you understand the language of investing so you can feel confident as an investor. Now, obviously this video is about millennials, but are millennials the only generation to have a class gap? No, of course not. I mean, the United States has huge class issues throughout all generations. And it's generally the trend that the younger you are, the broker you are, and the more debt you have, because you haven't been working long enough to get promotions and to pay off your debt. So in the US, as you age, you tend to have more money. You're getting promotions, you're job hopping, you're paying down your student loans, you're paying off your credit cards, you're investing, you're saving. So people who are 60 just naturally have more money than people who are 25 in most cases. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that while age is certainly a factor in wealth building, there are a bunch of other factors, right? Race, gender, disability, health, all of these things play into your ability to grow and hold on to wealth. In the United States until 1968, it was perfectly legal for banks to deny mortgages to people of color in specific neighborhoods, or just in general, if they didn't want to give these people mortgages. It was a practice called redlining, and though it is technically illegal now, it does still happen. Wells Fargo has gotten into hot water recently for denying Black and brown families mortgages and for charging Black and brown families more on mortgages they do give out than white families. We're coming up on 60 years since 1968, which means it's only been really one generation that families of color in the United States have had the same legal access to home ownership as white families. That means white families had literal generations since the founding of the United States of a head start on wealth building. So if we look at the class divide via the lens of race, we see that there are differences. If we look at the class divide via gender, we see that there are differences. I am interested in doing a video on class in the United States that's not just limited to millennials. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. I find that, especially in the personal finance community, people do not talk about class, and it is a huge indicator of your financial success. But that's not for this video. Let me know in the comments if you want to see it. So, do I think there's a millennial class divide? Yes, I really do think there is. And I don't think it's exclusive to millennials. I think that each generation has grappled with these same challenges, just in different ways. Not every generation has the same problems exactly, but every generation has economic differences and discrepancies. Not to sound like a self-important millennial, but I do think it's important that we discuss the millennial class divide because millennials are the biggest generation. And this class divide, this economic divide, not only impacts us right now, but will impact us down the line and will also impact our kids and our kids' kids. So, fellow millennials, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments if you think that our generation has a class divide. I'm definitely curious to hear from you about your own financial situation. I love talking about money. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and make sure to hit subscribe.